Burrill, and this is Classic Movie Musts, where every week we break down a classic movie while looking to provide artistic insight and historical context. At the very least, we'll talk about what makes these movies classics. Classic Movie Musts releases every Friday, ready to complement your weekend movie viewing plans. This week's supplementary episode is the next episode of Max's Movie Musts, our top 5 movie list show. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out on Patreon. Otherwise, in this week's episode, we are discussing The Letter. In this episode, in our feature presentation, Ted Walsh is here to continue our Weiler with Walsh series. But first, let's get into our opening credits. Our film this week is The Letter, which was directed by William Wyler and was released in 1940. The Letter stars Bette Davis, Herbert Marshall, and James Stevenson. On a moonlit tropical night, the native workers are asleep in their outdoor barracks. A shot is heard, the door of a house opens, and a man stumbles out of it, followed by a woman who calmly shoots him several more times, the last few while standing over his body. The woman is Leslie Crosby, the wife of a British rubber plantation manager. Her manservant recognizes the man whom she shot as Jeff Hammond, a well-regarded member of the European community. Leslie tells the servant to send for her husband, Robert, who is working at one of the plantations. Her husband returns, having summoned his attorney and a British police inspector. Leslie tells them that Jeff Hammond tried to make love to her and that she killed him to save her honor. Leslie is placed under arrest and put in jail in Singapore to await trial for murder. That she killed a man makes such a trial inevitable, but her eventual acquittal seems a foregone conclusion as the white community accepts her story and believes she acted heroically. Only her attorney, Howard Joyce, is rather suspicious. Howard's suspicions seem justified when his clerk shows him a copy of a letter Leslie wrote to Hammond the day she killed him, telling him that her husband would be away that evening and pleading with him to come and implicitly threatening him if he did not. The clerk tells Howard that the original letter is in the possession of Hammond's widow, a Eurasian woman who lives in the Chinese quarter of town. The letter is for sale, and the clerk himself, whom Howard had believed to be impeccable, stands to receive a substantial cut of the price. Howard then confronts Leslie with the damning evidence, and she breaks down and confesses to having written it, though she stands by her claim of having killed Hammond in self-defense. Yet Leslie cleverly manipulates the attorney into agreeing to buy back the letter, even though in doing so he will risk his own freedom and career. Because the couple's bank account is in Robert's name, Howard obtains Robert's consent to buy the letter, but he does so deceitfully, lying about and trivializing its content, leaving out the true circumstances, and giving the man no idea that the price is equivalent to almost all the money he has in the bank. Robert, depicted as a decent man, thoroughly in love with Leslie and somewhat gullible, is readily persuaded. Hammond's widow demands that Leslie come personally to hand over the $10,000 for the letter. She has since been released into her attorney's custody and requires Leslie to abase herself by picking up the letter at the widow's feet. With the letter suppressed, Leslie is easily acquitted. During a celebration after the trial, Robert announces that he plans to draw his savings out of his account to buy a rubber plantation in Sumatra. Howard and Leslie are forced to tell him that his savings are gone, that the impact of the letter would have hanged Leslie, and its price was accordingly high. After demanding to see the letter, Robert is devastated to learn from Leslie that Hammond was her lover for years and that she killed him out of jealousy. At a party celebrating Leslie's acquittal, Robert tells friends that he still plans to buy the plantation. Leslie, overhearing him, leaves the party and Robert breaks down. Leslie goes to her room, tries to take up her lace making, but cannot. She sobs. Stepping onto the balcony, she sees a knife laid on the matting. She withdraws, shocked. Robert comes into the room and offers to forgive her if she can swear that she loves him. At first, Leslie agrees to tell him that she loves him and that she will do all in her power to make him happy. When he kisses her, she cries no, and then breaks down and confesses that she still loves the man that she killed. Robert rushes out of the room. Leslie looks out at the patio mat, and the knife is gone. She knows that Hammond's widow had planted it there and then has taken it away. She walks out through the gardens and finally encounters the woman who glares at her fiercely. The man who accompanies her grabs Leslie and stuffs a cloth in her mouth to silence her, and then the woman pulls the knife from her garments and stabs Leslie, who falls to the ground. As the two murderers attempt to slip away silently, they are confronted by a policeman. The clouds blot out the moonlight and darken the area, whereas Leslie was killed. Then the clouds open, and the moon's rays shine where her body lies, but no one is there to see it. The letter was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. It was nominated for Best Original Score, Best Film Editing, Best Black and White Cinematography, Best Supporting Actor for James Stevenson, Best Actress for Bette Davis, Best Director for William Wyler, and Best Picture. Now, let's talk staircases, because it's time for our feature presentation. Joining us for today's feature presentation, it's Ted Walsh. Ted, how are you?
Very well, Max. Thank you. Great to be with you.
Well, it's a Wyler with Walsh week, so you can't have Wyler with Walsh without Walsh. I mean, that
Right.
would be
And Weiler already has a whole repository of things to bring to the occasion, one of which we will talk about today with great delight, I think.
indeed. In case you're a little confused right off the bat, that probably means you missed our episode on Dead End, which introduced this idea that Ted wants to do more William Wyler movies, of which I am fully in support. And so we're going to aim to do one William Wyler movie every month, kind of tracing a little, just a discussion about his amazing career and his wonderful filmography. And so we've already done the first episode on that. Well, obviously, we had earlier done an episode on the Heiress, so that won't actually be part of this. But the first episode of this new Wyler with Walsh series was on Dead End. And I think a great episode. If you haven't checked it out, please do. And now we're ready for the second episode, which is going to be on The Letter. And I'm just going to say it now. I mean, I don't want to get too committed, but this might be one of my favorite Wyler movies, Ted. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's certainly high on my list, uh, and I don't want to give away too much, but it's high on my list because it is the least stairway fixated of all the Wyler films. However, the way in which it is stairway fixated is simply delicious to talk about, except it's a short stairway, not a long stairway. And we will talk about it.
We will indeed. And in fact, when it's the moment is right, there are 2 key short stairways, Ted.
And it's the second that is my favorite.
Of course. And so really, we have a lot to talk about here, as always.
Right.
You can't not talk about stairways. So anyway, I love this movie. I think it's we're going to talk about a lot of aspects of it. I think part of the reason that it is ranked so highly for me, a lot of Wyler's motifs play into it, but because it's fairly simple in its story, it really allows, we get more than a handful of scenes where we get all of the main characters together. And because of how these scenes are shot and staged, we just get to watch all of them at the exact same time. And someone's talking and we're watching them, but we're also witnessing a reaction over here. And to me, it's such a rich visual, character experience when you have 3, such great actors in kind of the starring roles. It makes it just absolutely fascinating to watch. I think I find myself when I rewatch this film focusing on a different character at different, in different ways per scene, and I love that.
Here, and it's all, not all, but much of this, of course, is due to our friend William Wyler, because he knows how to. This exists first as a short story, then it turned into a play, then it turned into a 1929 movie, and then the 1940 movie. But Wyler knows how to open it up while still keeping it closed in. It needs to be both. But you're absolutely right. He manages to show action and reaction by the way in which he places his camera or moves his camera, and his sensitivity to the interplay among and between characters is especially on view here. It's almost a textbook example for young filmmakers. If you're going to keep the integrity of a stage play and yet make it cinematic, this is how you do it. And it doesn't mean you have to find all these different locations or move here, there, and yon. No, it just means you have to enrich the moment by where the camera decides to look and
Absolutely.
how it looks where it looks.
And that's obviously something we talked about at great length in our episode on Dead End, another theatrical play that was converted to movie. And Wyler just is one of those geniuses who understands what kind of the theatricality if it's a play being adapted, but also how can film enhance that experience. And obviously, we see so much of that here. And something else that you and I talked about in the last episode is Wyler's ability to adapt his style to whatever the story is being told. And you watch this movie in 1940, and it gets a certain amount of credit, but I don't think it gets the credit it deserves in terms of how much of a forerunner of film noir it really is. But again, not that it's setting out to be, not that anyone was setting out to really make noir per se, because it wasn't termed that, but his understanding of the themes and the anxieties and the tensions in this story, and saying, this is how I need it to look and feel for it to convey that sense from these characters. I mean, it's that total marriage of theme of story and theme of visual experience.
Right. I'm really happy, Max, you mentioned noir, because, again, without meaning to specifically, because as you rightly say, noir had yet to define itself. This has so many of the ingredients of noir. One, the very setting in Malaya means that you're going to have some Venetian blinds and opportunity for lighting in a certain way that's noir-like. But you also have one of the great femme fatales of all time, as beautifully played by Bette Davis, and you also have that not requirement, but that characteristic of noir, where at least one of the principal characters, be it an investigator or in this case both an investigator and a husband, who have at least initially no idea what they're in for and what is really going on. And you're absolutely right. If you take this film in 1940 and then next year you have Casablanca, and then a little bit later you have Double Indemnity, and then noir is really starting to find itself, but it's going to be for many years thereafter until we start to codify it.
Absolutely. But you obviously, we have a mystery that unfolds, and I always, to me, the Maltese Falcon is always that film that just is like, and then that's 1 year later here. It's that film that just, noir is here, and it is a detective mystery experience. But the beauty of noir is it is a style that transcends story, and it can involve so many different genre elements. And I think you see that so beautifully here, because it doesn't, as I said, we don't have an understanding of noir yet in 1940, but this film is in it, and it is experiencing that angst, and I love it so much. And your point about the femme fatale, I mean, Leslie has to rank as one of the absolute greats, because she, by the end of this film, has more or less destroyed the lives of all the men that she has interacted with, completely. Obviously, one is dead at the start of the movie, and that's great. Her husband, by the end, is a shell of a man, heartbroken, doesn't know which way to look. And then we have Mr. Joyce, our lawyer, who I want to just really get into over our conversation, because he's the only man who is brought down by really compromising his virtues, his principles that he holds dear. And we see him lose that, or give it up, quite literally. And so, I mean, she is tearing down every man she comes into contact with,
Right.
which
And
is one of the great femme fatale experiences of any movie.
here, here. And I'm so glad you mentioned Howard Joyce because I think first of all, I think Henry Stevenson's performance is, I know it's underappreciated. And as a person who's worked with a lot of actors in his life, it's a brilliant performance. And he actually, of the two guys, well, if you want to add the third, he gets shot. Well, we'll leave him out for a moment. But in a way, he pays the even certainly as big a price as the husband because he's a deeply principled man who, out of affection and a kind of, there's a certain amount of class recognition of people that you know are in your world and that you do right by, but in spite of everything in him, he does something he knows to be wrong, and he knows, and he even says it out loud, that he's going to live to regret it. And it's a beautiful performance by Stevenson.
It is, and I mean, for me personally speaking, not to obviously Betty Davis as always is fantastic. To me, it's the performance of this movie is his performance because it you know obviously it's a much more interior experience, but the way he conveys it is it's so powerful.
Okay, I'm going to get a little nerdy here. I happen to love the writing of Somerset Maugham, and of course, this is from a Somerset Maugham story and play. And Somerset Maugham is deep in the heart of this story. And there is almost always in a Somerset Maugham story that character like Howard Joyce, who one way or another finds him or herself at the intersection of a story not of their own making, but in which they end up paying some kind of enormous price because they were caught at that intersection and and did one thing that then led to another. And I won't go beyond that, but I'm thinking particularly of The Razor's Edge, which happens to be another one of my favorite Maugham movies, movies made from a Maugham, in this case, novel. But there's so many others that Maugham is very much about this kind of character, and in some ways, he's always kind of putting his own flawed self, as he saw himself, at that intersection in the story.
And so what so much of what we I think makes it so compelling is that we only get a taste of his destruction. We see it in the courtroom, obviously, when he's giving his final address and when then the verdict is given. Something I think we'll talk more about later. And then as well in the final confrontation between where he's divulged that he has committed this crime and that he's been hiding it between Leslie and himself and Robert. So in those two scenes, we get a taste of it. But compared to Leslie and Robert, his destruction isn't going to be felt as nearly yet. And so we imagine kind of the tortured existence that he is now going to go through after the case, after this is all done. And so I think part of that, it just ignites our imagination so much more compared to obviously Leslie's very distinct fate. And even Robert, we see him at such a low
Right.
that it's hard to go much lower.
And I think one of the ways in which both Wyler and the story in general get to the heart of what you're talking about is that the assistant in the office, the worker, Ong, he intuitively knows that even in every deeply principled human being, there is that space, that place where you can enter in and do a little double dealing or whatever it is. And the beautiful performance by that actor who respects his boss very much, but also knows that like every other human being, there's going to be a patch or two of of weakness. By the way, just a little thing. I don't know if any of our listeners are Bonanza freaks, but if you didn't know, the actor who plays Ong is Hop Singh in Bonanza, a regular in Bonanza, and God bless him because he's delightful. Just have to throw that in.
I mean, he's so God, he gives such a performance in this film. I mean, he's the Singaporean Uriah Heep in this movie for sure.
Exactly.
Um,
Meets Pecksniff, by the way. It's sort of Uriah Heep meets Pecksniff. He's
yeah,
so proper, and yet he's so double dealing.
but I love that he's so proper that he's not going to hide it either. I love the moment when he's, what are you getting out of this? And he's like $2,000. I mean, he's just like, oh, like not like any. There's no shame about it in that moment.
And he's always smiling. He's always
absolutely
smiling.
a sickening
Right.
grin if there
And
ever
he's
was one.
always proper. And but without him, we really need him not only just for the story part too, but he is that person that you'll always meet even in your own life who recognizes that in every human being, no matter how perfect, there's going to be, well, let's go back to the Garden of Eden. There's going to be the snake who knows that if he finds Eve alone by the tree and it's near noon and she's hungry, uh, it's maybe a moment that even the beautiful, perfect Eve might have a little flaw.
Yeah.
We all do.
Now, to me, what makes, as I said, it's these scenes where we get, especially getting Leslie, Robert, and Howard all together, where we get to really, watch. Often we're listening to either Leslie or Howard, but each actor is giving such a performance, even in those moments of just reaction. And to me, it plays into what are the key four veils of illusion to me that are just so interesting about this movie. And I think, the one almost detraction I have of this movie is Wyler cuts to that moon too many times, just a couple too many times. But to me, it does make the point of those clouds veiling the moon and then going away, and we get to see the world for what it is. That is this story where we get veils cast over reality. And what are they? To me, it's the Crosby's marriage, obviously, Leslie and Robert, and their sense that, what they pretend to have this extremely loving marriage, but obviously we learn that it is as illusions go, it is a total facade. Then we have Leslie herself. And this is, obviously one of the great ones to watch over the course of this movie. This calm, cool, methodical woman who does lace work to perfection is really a raging ball of passion underneath. Oh, love it. We've talked about Howard. Howard, this principled lawyer, as he says in that amazing scene, a man has an obligation to his profession, to himself, but obviously we learn where that goes. And then the last one, which I think is, from my understanding, more prevalent in the play, a little less so, but it is, and it's something you've already touched on, and it's worth touching on as well, coming out of our conversation out of the character of Ong and the other characters. It is the moral superiority of these British colonialists compared to the local Asian community of the Singaporean and the Malay community, because obviously it's very directly there in the wife figure, the newly born widow, which is, it's unfortunate that it's cast as someone who's obviously and very obviously not Asian, but that moral superiority is this subtext of an illusion. Of course, we learn that these British people have no claim to any moral superiority whatsoever. And to me, in every scene, kind of juggling those four elements, those illusions, is just, it's so masterfully done and makes this what make this for me such a rich text to unpack.
That's beautifully put, Max. To which I want to respond particularly to your moon being covered up by the clouds once too often. Absolutely agree. And it's not helped by the fact that you're getting exactly the same Max Steiner music at every moment that happens. And it also is yet another way in which, yeah, by the way, there are two films that I almost refuse to watch the last 2 minutes of
Mm,
because I think they otherwise ruin a perfect story. And as I'm sure we will get into, the only reason this movie ends the way it ends is because of the Hayes office and its censorship. It is not the way this story ends, and it completely compromises what the point that mom is trying to make. Uh, but and the other movie, if anybody's interested, is A Streetcar Named Desire. Uh, when it's it's Stanley doesn't go back to Stella, and you go, well, that's kind of the whole point of the play and the movie. But again, the censors demanded that that's the
yes.
yeah. So anyway, uh, we don't need to go into the ending. Just simply to say this: for Leslie, the punishment is not an easy one like death. The punishment is that with all her heart, she still loves the man she killed.
Which, of course, I believe is the ending of the play.
That
Her
is
her
correct.
her declaration that she's still in love with the man she killed is the final blow. And as you say, that is the final blow to her. That is the killing blow.
That is correct. And so she and Robert, everybody, all three of them have to live with what has been wrought. And then the great beauty of this story, Max, among many, many, many others, we never meet the man she kills.
No.
We only hear a little bit about him. He apparently is something of a womanizer, very good looking guy. People generally liked him. He was convivial. He was, and we sort of build up a vague picture of him. But thank God we don't meet him.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and by the way, Gail Sundersgaard, I know she's not Asian, and I know she plays the Asian wife, but she brings two things to the table that are pretty kind of awesome. One is that face of hers, which is this mask of rage and enigmatic hostility, and the other is her height. Her height really works to an advantage. And at one moment, I don't know if you noticed, when Leslie has to take the money to her uh, and get the letter from her, not only is her height clearly she dominates Betty Davis, but she's also on a little rise, so she's even higher. Uh, but you're right. Back in the day, listen, they just didn't cast. They didn't care about ethnic casting.
No.
They just didn't care, and
No, they
it's
did not, and it's a shame. But your the traits you mentioned are certainly valid, and the her facial expressions are certainly if looks could kill, they
she's
they
terrifying. I'm sorry, she is truly terrifying, and the only thing that can possibly match her is Betty Davis. I mean, Betty Davis, at least when she takes off her shawl, and with that kind of implacable face that Davis can give, in Davis's way, she is almost as threatening. Uh,
yeah.
Almost.
Well, and of course, one of the compelling elements of this movie as well is it plays with our expectations of Betty Davis in the sense that she is an actress that we associate with a certain histrionic affect, and this character demands that cool and calm, and not that it's not still a distinctly Betty Davis performance, but it's not necessarily, we're waiting for those moments of rage to boil over, but she's always keeping it below the surface. I mean, from those first scenes in their house where she's describing the the murder, and in any of those scenes where she's talking, she is so calm, she's so cool, and it lends itself to a very different experience of experiencing Betty Davis on screen. I want to talk about that first one for a second when she is relaying the events of this murder, because William Wyler does a bold thing here where he takes that moment to give us objective camera work, where we are now not looking at Betty Davis telling us the story. We are looking at what she is telling us happened, going up the stair, tripping over 2 stairs, a first mini staircase, getting the gun, and then obviously out and down a staircase to a death. But what's so great about that moment to me is it's so objective. We are so not distracted by Bette Davis that we are immediately saying to ourselves, this story doesn't make sense. This is too clean. It's too perfectly, oh, I was here and then there. And you say something is not adding up. And it is, I think, to me, that objective moment. I mean, I think we miss Bette Davis when we're not looking at her. But it is those moments where you can have a moment to say, objectively look at a situation and say, right from the beginning, this situation doesn't add up.
Here, here. And we will shortly learn, because he'll tell us, but we actually start to even suspect it here, that the Howard Joyce character is very suspicious of this narrative, whereas the younger sort of innocent guy, isn't it remarkable?
Oh
Howard?
My God!
And my
she's so calm, cool, and collected.
And my favorite is a bit later when she's serving them breakfast, and it's like, should we call this breakfast or whatnot? Her performance is actually chilling. And it's largely, and you've already said this, but it's largely what she isn't doing, the restraint that she brings to this. Because we know that Bette Davis is not by nature restrained. But when she is restrained, as she is here, and at many moments in her other great movie with Herbert Marshall, namely The Little Foxes, we see the power of restraint. And by the way, just before I forget it, because I know I'm going to, I can't help but draw a little analogy in 2 Wyler movies, and that is in The Heiress, we have Catherine Sloper and her needlework. And in this movie, we have Leslie Crosby and her lace work. And how, in a way, it is used to help tell the story, because by the end of this, oh my gosh, when did you get all this work done on your beautiful lace work? And it's 2 very enigmatic, fascinating women.
Well, it's 2 women absolutely consumed by this interior angst that they're just suppressing. Right. And, that manifests itself in this extremely fine, extremely, delicate work. I think it's a connection absolutely worth making. One that I think about. Yeah, but I think about it all the time because it's so similar that, these 2 women who are just, especially at the end of The Heiress, not to go on like too much of a tangent, but when she's feeling so much and she's about to deliver the crushing blow, but she's just there finally finishing her needlework, and you say, there's so much going on beneath the surface here. And I agree with you, first of all, that it drives me, like, this poor woman in this story you think has just been nearly raped and has killed a man, and you make her make breakfast? Come on. Like you 3 couldn't get together and make some rice for breakfast? Come on.
Or get one of the natives who is
one of the many servants. Just because the head boy ran away, no one knows how to make food.
Right. And of course, anyway, I could go on, but maybe if somebody's looking for a doctoral thesis out there or something, needlework and suppression, or there's something in needlework. I don't know where we go with this, but there's something there. I want to go back to one other thing too. The very, very, very opening of this movie is one of my all-time favorites of any movie. Just the way that we hear the dripping of the rubber from the trees, the way we see the servants, the natives, in their sleeping hut, the music that Steiner gives us here, the way the camera is just sort of traversing a rather placid and yet just ever so slightly ominous landscape. And then the gunshots. It's just as masterful as openings get. And it's such a shame, and if Wyler had his way, this isn't how it would have been, that this brilliant opening can't be bookended with a brilliant close. But
That's a
it's just
fair
the way
point.
it is. It's just the way it is.
It's a fair point. But again, obviously touching on that, the fourth of my veils of illusion, that moral superiority that is, such a facade in this film. The opening of this film reminds me completely of Dead End, our last movie that we talked about. Here we are in one beautiful tracking shot. We are immediately shown the class distinction that exists in this society, but the way it's so beautifully done, where you have this, pristine bungalow in the background, beautifully lit, very comfortable looking. But no, we are behind the servants' outdoor hammock quarters. And so in one shot, you have complete juxtaposition of the class dynamic that underlies, this whole story. And to me, it's, that it's
And
establishes part of the mood immediately.
and also that really it's almost cruel, the economic advantage that the upper class folks get from all this. Even when Robert is talking about the great deal he's going to get on his $10,000, I get 3 bungalows and whatnot. You know that that's at the price of somebody else.
Sure.
That's, and also when those boys, as they keep calling them, they're so damn good when they have to report this murder, and we show that brilliant montage of people running, stumbling, and driving fast to get to the news to Robert. We go, these workers are hardworking, good people who do what they do for almost nothing.
Yeah.
That
No,
that
I mean,
But the way he doesn't lay into it at the same time, I love. It's just there in the story, and it's an important grace note to the story, but it is not the story.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I've mentioned that I love how this film gives us these scenes to just, I feel like I could watch them over and over again. We've talked about one now already, which is Leslie's opening, relaying of the events. And we get, a series of these, different combinations of people, but there's two that I want to get your thoughts on here, Ted.
Sure.
One, which is, pivotal in the sense of, well, they both involve Howard, and I want to talk more about Howard because he's my favorite character in the movie. His confrontation of Leslie in the prison.
Mm.
And, he gives us his speech that, the man has the obligation to his principles, to himself, to his profession, which he then promptly discards. And this scene leads into the scene before they go to Chinatown on his back porch when everyone leaves, and he has these moments of conversation with Leslie. And I want to get your thoughts here because I think there is this other element at play that just lends itself to this rich tapestry here, that the self-loathing that Howard Joyce brings upon himself for compromising his values. At the core of that, to me, watching these scenes, is that he, at any given moment when alone with Leslie, is both hates her and is attracted to her.
Mm.
And he cannot stand that, push and pull. And you watch these scenes first of all, which in after she faints and it comes back and she's come to, and he's standing at the foot of her bed, and it's just the back of her silhouette, which is placed literally at groin height. But whatever, we don't need to get into that. But this, there's just it's again, it's the subtlety of such talented actors that you can have these moments and these lines delivered with such tremendous subtext. You are watching me all night. Well, I'm responsible to you, responsible for you to the court. But it's not just that. And he's looking at her, and you see it in his eyes. He hates her for what a manipulative, deceptive woman she is. But I can't help but read into it that he also hates her for how she's making him feel, and that it's working on him. Both that he's given up his values, but there's also more.
And you've already alluded to this. We are of the same class, and therefore there is that attraction based on that. We and it's wonderfully a little kind of uh, obligato to that. Both of those scenes is the woman who's with her in the prison, the prison guard woman who says, "Oh, isn't she? She's wonderful. She's just the everybody loves her and whatnot." And of course, Leslie is playing this. And I think the most one of the most frightening lines is, "Prison is a great place to catch up on your sleep," and you kind of wonder about someone who is that free of whatever should be. I mean, if I were in prison for a murder that I actually created, I don't think I'd be sleeping a whole lot. But
But again, that's Leslie, right? She is calm and cool and collected, and we don't quite until later, halfway midpoint on, we don't get that sense of what's really going on underneath the
right.
surface there.
And the other point I make, because I think your point about his attraction to her is obvious, and again, though, typical of Weiler, not in the least overplayed, and because of Stevenson's brilliant performance, certainly not overplayed. But
No.
the thing that happens with the Stevensons of this world, it happens to all of us. Once you've taken step number one, then steps number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are just bound to happen. And you can't go back after that first decision. And really that first decision happens after he reads the letter out loud to her. And it's right there for us to hear and her to hear. And then he says something to the effect, I can't quote the exact line, "All I want to know now is what I need to know to
save your neck.
to save your neck, period.
Yep.
Do not tell me anything more, because I can live with the compromises I've already made, but I just can't live with any more than that."
Yeah.
Isn't that what happens to us? Isn't that why this script and this situation is so compelling to all of us? That's who we are. That's the character. You and I agree on this, absolutely. I was going to begin the conversation with that. This is the character that matters in this story.
And we see it. I mean, the absolute blossoming of it is, in the courtroom scene.
Oh.
First, when he delivering his address to the jurors, and it's exactly that we get the sense that on the one hand, he feels in his inside that everything he's saying is true. This remarkable woman, and she's, how she's handled this situation, but then he knows his reality as well. And he's like, why do I know more about her than I'd like? Can't I just feel this way, that she's this remarkable woman? And we see that torture. And to me, we've talked about the deep focus, which, Weiler does so masterfully in this film. But when they come out to read the verdict at the end, and, she's standing alone in this courtroom, and it's Howard Joyce in the front corner, and he's there, and his reaction is there to be read. And I forget Bette Davis in that scene. I watch him every time, and I can't take my eyes off of him. That's it, it's
so do I. And here again, just whoever's decision this was in the script, to have one of the other barristers come over and congratulate him on how brilliant he was. Just a little thing comes over, "Oh, that was really beautifully done." And that's the last thing he wants to hear.
Compounded by Ong saying, "I congratulate you on your victory," and that's just that's the knife in his back.
That
or
is
front,
the knife. Yeah. Speaking of knives, we've got a lot of those in this story. But it's just so effective. How we always look for this in great storytelling, Max, where you have a very specific story of a situation that none of us can probably imagine ourselves in, that brings up things about ourselves and about each other that we can recognize even on a daily basis. How these big compromises that the Howard Joyces make remind us of the little compromises we make each and every day. And I just find this and also it's beautifully efficient. This is just an hour and a half, this movie. It does not waste a moment. It keeps this small story, and I mean small in terms of the number of people and issues. It keeps it compact, and that compactness adds enormous energy to the storytelling.
Absolutely. And likewise, the reverse of what I just said, in the scene that, follows, and now we have Leslie and Howard and Robert all together in the big scene of revealing this situation to Robert. And I mean, not to discredit Herbert Marshall's performance, because his performance equally, I mean, it is a trifecta of performances, and it wouldn't work without each bringing their talents to bear. And you have this amazing scene taking place between Robert and Howard, this confrontation of like, what are you telling me? But I can't take my eyes off Bette Davis in that scene, sitting behind her husband, sitting behind, Leslie sitting, and the look on her face as Robert is saying, I need to know what's in this letter, is like, I mean, again, if looks could kill, it's like, oh my God. So you have these scenes, and that's what I love about it, is it's, and not to discredit, I mean, you can say, oh, deep focus, but it's not just the focus, right? It's the staging. It's understanding, how can I layer characters on top of characters? How can I elicit each of these performances at the same time so that you can see all of these simultaneously? I mean, it's so masterfully done. It's so methodically prepared.
Yeah,
You can't give it enough credit.
in the theater we call it blocking, and I'm always fascinated how adept and adroit William Wyler is at blocking. When and if we do the film Dodsworth, I'll be talking more about that, because one of the things that fascinates me the most, uh, and the what's the levels of reveal in the last 15 minutes of the movie, when the discoveries we know that have to be made and have to be revealed to this character, that character, and the whole thing, complemented kind of wonderfully by Frida Enniscort at throwing the party, and oh, everybody loves Leslie and whatnot, and that beautifully lit room where everybody's dancing and having a good time, and then we're in that very dark noir room where
Oh man.
Betty's hanging out, and then all the stuff that's going on the street outside. It's just the whole landscape of this movie is so uh, well handled that yet again our guy Wyler, I tell you, they just don't get much better than William Wyler.
No, they don't. And so I'm going to now pose a kind of a closing question. I mean, as we're getting towards the close, we're going to pretend that this movie ended the way it was supposed to,
Yes, sir.
with those lines that, she still loves the man that she killed. And I mean, that is, as we've already said, that is the perfect killing blow to the end of the film. The great, of course, for those of you who don't know, maybe you already do, if you've read a lot about the letter, the great disagreement between Bette Davis and William Wyler is that when she's giving her speech to her husband and telling him ultimately that she still loves the man, that she is facing away from us. She is facing, we see her back for much of this speech. And this was a huge point of contention between the two of them. William Wyler says, you can't face the other way. You need to be looking directly, and we need to see this performance. But Bette Davis said she just couldn't, that a wife just couldn't say those words to her husband's face. They were so cruel that she would have to look away. And I want to know where you come down on it, Ted, because at the same time, I'm just not so sure by the end of this film that Leslie would care too much about how anyone feels except herself. And I do feel like I'm kind of on Wyler's side, but I understand where Betty's coming from.
I understand where Betty's coming from, but I'm on Wyler's side 100%. Most wives would feel as Betty feels, but Leslie Crosby, just like the wife in The Little Foxes, when she is doing her most murderous, both with a small m and a large and a small m actions, will look you in the eye. Look at the way she kills her lover.
Yeah.
Look at the way she kills her lover. And also, I love the fact that during much of one of those last moments, she's sitting on the bottom stair of a very small two-staircase. What, this is such a ridiculous thing, but I have to mention something that might be fun for your viewers if they want to watch many Herbert Marshall movies. Herbert Marshall, very sadly, lost a leg in World War One, and so he did his career with a prosthetic leg. And directors had to learn how to shoot sometimes around it because as prosthetic legs back in the day were shall we say less supple and flexible than they are today. I mean, they're pretty terrific today, we're told, but back then it was cumbersome. And Marshall does such a great job, but there are just moments where the director has to decide that maybe the requirement of not pointing up that difficulty that Marshall had uh, might not compromise the shot, but it'll change how a shot's going to be. Maybe not the way you wanted to do the shot in the first place. It's just kind of, and Marshall himself was fine if you talked about this. This is not some sort of cruel pointing out somebody's disability. This is just an interesting thing about a wonderful guy and a wonderful actor, Herbert
Yeah,
Marshall.
no question. Because especially the loss of her, looking away or hiding her face for some of those final moments is, of course, that is when the veil ultimately breaks. She just cannot keep the calm, cool composure that we've seen, and she ultimately makes her, final confession, and that is the confession of everything.
Well, the breakaway from the
And
kiss is just awesome. I mean,
yeah,
it,
absolutely.
and that may be, that's a great point. Come to think of it, that may be her biggest moment in the film. That may
Well,
be,
yeah,
yeah. That is
it's
her. That is her when Betty Davis gets to do her Betty Davis thing. Uh,
I mean, it is the moment where we finally get to see who this woman, really is, where she is not, performing a character for the people around her. And so it is what it is, but that you have those, it's always interesting to get a little insight into the decisions that go into, what can seem like offhand or non-calculated moments. It's often
sure.
what make, quite a bit of difference, but, I love this movie. These performances to me, yeah, the Betty Davis, Leslie Crosby, one of the great femme fatales, just tearing down everyone around her.
Right.
And she whether she gets the knife or not, she's already set up her own, uh, destruction.
Yeah, I'm just sorry she didn't have to live out her days with the results of with the consequences of her action, but rather conveniently gets uh, killed out on the street very shortly after. Come on, you have to live with this longer than that, honey. And
Yeah,
I know Weiler felt the same, and I'm sure Davis felt the same. And not only that, but the others have to. The ones who killed her, they also have to get caught. Everybody has to be properly punished in Hayes' world,
right.
Hayes' office world. Too bad, but
Yeah,
there you go.
it's exactly, but it's it's always worth mentioning that those are the why why we get so many of those Hollywood endings is because of flat out censorship. It's what it is. But such a such a stylized, just rich, absolutely fascinating movie. I love it. As I say, not to say that it's one of Weiler's absolute best. Obviously, we're going to continue to go through it, but it is one of my favorites of his filmography.
And I'd like to close with this, Max. A well-known fact that even though she was famously difficult to work with, Betty Davis said right up to the very end of her life that William Wyler was hands down the best director that she ever worked with, and she learned more about acting for the camera from Wyler than from anyone. Uh, she loved working with him, and she worked with him, as we all well know, more than once.
Indeed. Indeed, indeed. Ted, such a pleasure. I'm already, every one at a time we're going to do one of these episodes, I'm going to think to myself, man, I'm glad that Ted Walsh said we need to do more William Wyler movies because I love it. So, Ted, thank you as always. That concludes our episode on The Letter. I'd love to hear what you think of this classic movie must. Feel free to tweet at Movie Must Pod, email me at classicmoviemust@gmail.com, or DM me on Patreon. Thank you to our Patreon producers, Eleanor B., Max Henri, Pedro R., Ryan D., Jonathan, Bernie, Stephen Schofield, Abby Winslow, and Bill Ryan. On next week's episode, we are discussing advise and consent. Thank you so much for listening, and until the next episode, keep up with your classics.